So this is looking through the open source looking glass. The song that played was by Angus. He wrote the song, and I thought it was so good, we made it the Babel song. So now if you go to the Babel repo, there's a song.md. And then Sean was the one that did the cover of it. So I'm Henry. I am LeftPad on Twitter, and I am going to be talking about Battle 7. When I originally submitted this talk, I thought that I was going to talk about Battle 7 because it would be done by now. But that didn't happen. And I was just like looking through Google, and then the first suggestion is the release date because everyone wants to know when it's going to happen. And we did an RC like a week ago, so hopefully it will be very soon. I'm not going to come up here and be like, oh, I'm going to release it right now. So that's just not how I work. And I don't know, I guess I found myself in a constant state of feeling a lot of anxiety and guilt. And so maybe you were expecting a very technical talk about code and what's going to be in 7, but that's not happening today. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I've been feeling. So yeah, the question really is like, why am I so anxious? That, you know, maybe every day or just moments in time where you're just feeling like, oh, am I supposed to be like feeling really happy? Like, oh, I'm like doing full-time open source. That, you know, every day should be amazing and like joyous. But looking back, it helped me to think about like, why am I feeling this way? After all, yeah, I'm a full-time maintainer. And then, yeah, I find myself like the pressures of doing that kind of affected, you know, my relationships and even like my health. I think my eczema has been the worst it's been for a while. And just like thinking about like what am I actually doing here? And what about this whole opportunity that I get and the privilege to be able to do this? Or am I just facing just different challenges that happens when you're trying to do something like this? I think maybe a lot of it was I had a desire to take open source seriously, but I ended up taking myself too seriously. I didn't give myself the opportunity to like mess up or be wrong. So I mean, even writing this talk was always weird because I'm just like, I don't want to think about any of that either. And I think I want to break down some of the issues between the concrete fears and the abstract ones. And so the ones that are obvious and the ones that are a little bit more subtle. So of course the obvious one is money. It's hard to talk about money. There's a lot of fear in introducing money at all in open source because it kind of feels like it poisons the essence of what it is of just like doing it for free or doing it because you want to. But I think we've already been paying the costs of only relying on volunteers to work on the things that we use every day. And I think that's what I talked about at the last year. And so, yeah, fundraising is a weird word, but I remember asking people to donate last year, and I think the yearly budget was like $10,000 a year. And even when I quit my job, it was really hard to like ask people to help because you always feel like this. It's just awkward to do that. And it was like, it felt like a chore, like a necessary evil. But I think I've learned that, you know, it's not about like just like begging for money, but coming from a stance of like, hey, there's an opportunity for us to make things better. And if you want to be a part of this vision of what your project or whatever you're doing is, then you can take a part of that. And I also had this fear of like getting caught up in thinking about money. Like, because obviously I have to survive and to live, you're thinking about money all the time. And I had this fear like, well, if I only think about money, then what was the point of like doing open source when I wanted to help people? And then every day it's like constantly on your mind. Should I be spending time like raising money? Should I be working on this or that? And should I be looking into other ways of sustaining myself? How much is enough? And with donations, it's kind of weird. It's obviously unstable, and it's funny to see that you can even get notifications on Patreon. It's kind of like with GitHub or Twitter, and then now you see like, oh, this person pledged and this person deleted, and now you feel even weirder because you're like, oh, I know that person. They stopped donating. You're like, like, it's hard to not take that personally, but it's like, yeah, you have to let go because obviously they don't have to give to you, and I shouldn't be caring about that. And because then you might start thinking, like, did I do something wrong? Did I like make them mad in some way? It's usually really easy to compromise the vision that you had at first just because you want to make some money. And say with Patreon, you have rewards, and then now you're like spending all your time trying to figure out how to like reward people for giving you extra money instead of just working on the work that people were paying you for. And what about just being self-employed in general? I don't know that much about taxes or making an LLC or finding a lawyer or CPA, and then what about health insurance? Do I get COBRA right now, or do I find a plan later? What about your medication and all the other things you have to deal with? Maybe I'll just not do it. You don't know. And just what about public work in general? I think open source is pretty unique in that you get to work on things that a lot of people in the world are affected by, and you kind of don't see it a lot. You're always asking yourself, did we document everything that we need to? Are we able to get new people in? What if we need to make a controversial change, and is it worth doing in the first place? I spent a really long time trying to write the blog post that removed the stage presets because I knew there was going to be a lot of potential backlash, and maybe it's going to happen anyway, but I just felt like I had to do that. And so, yeah, I asked myself, why does it take so long to release projects or open source or anything? I mean, some of these are pretty common in anything. It's not really unique to open source. There's obviously scope creep where you want to add this feature in, and then someone else want to add it in, and then you don't really have a deadline, so you're like, oh, let's just add this in, and a month later, another thing, and another thing. And then you also have all your users that are like, hey, you didn't fix this bug yet, or we need this thing right now. And so you're like, okay, maybe I'll add this in as well. And then in the day-to-day, you're on Twitter or GitHub or Slack, and people are asking you for help all the time. You kind of get distracted. And it's just hard to really, it gets kind of overwhelming. And then later, even if you have something that you added in, you need someone to review that code. Even if I'm the only person doing it full time, then I need to ask other volunteers to help as well. And I don't want to burden them either. And what about testing? And what if there's a regression from the fix that we had before? It doesn't just get better because like one person is getting to work on it full time. And I think there are a few things that are unique in open source. Most of the time, most projects are completely volunteer. There's a lot of ambition to make this huge hype about what this project's going to be, like, the major release. And I don't desire to be like a BDFL or someone that tells everyone what to do. And so we have consensus, but then if not everyone's available to be there, then it's like you have to make the decision to do something. And maybe I don't really know what that is, and I've never really learned that. And maybe I'm just trying to figure this out just like everyone else. We don't have a program manager. I guess I am the program manager. We are the ones doing all the work. And I think there's a huge amount of inertia. Like once you kind of are in beta for like beta 10, now we're like at beta 56 or something. It's really easy to kind of just like, oh, it gets harder and harder to want to release. And it's funny when people kind of message me, like well-intentioned. They're like, hey, when's it going to be released? And I'll be like, next month, I think. And then next month comes around, it's like, next month. Or people just like, they're like, oh, I think you should just do it. They're not knowing any context about what's going on. And so there's like a lot of restlessness inside where it's like, I want to rush it out because I know I want to release it just as much as everyone else. But then I don't want to like just kind of YOLO and do whatever. And then there's a lot of what ifs, and what about XYZ? Like what about backwards compatibility? What about upgrade guides? What about automating fixes and code mods? What about multiple release lines? What happens when you say it's a beta, but then all these other dependencies use the beta anyway, and then they make it a stable version? And then that makes more pressure on all of us because someone else will complain it didn't work, and then now you have to help them as well. So then, how do we respond in this kind of situation? I think it's really easy to just kind of, I want to you want to run away or quit or give up, or you kind of just hide it and you kind of feel like you have to willpower your way through this kind of thing, which will just lead to more burnout. And I think if I don't figure out how to deal with it now, it's just going to be the same thing over and over in the future. It's not going to be any different. I can't really just hide from it. And so I think I'd like to be someone of integrity where I say, I really commit to doing this, but the problem is I don't find myself, I say in my mind I believe something, but then I'm not actually acting it out. Great example of this, I read this blog article about self-confidence and all this stuff, and I find myself not being able to actually live that out. It's funny how you can write an article about it and then not actually do it. But I think, again, there's a quote that I really liked where it says, he doesn't call the qualified, but rather qualifies the called. And I think this is about living in a state of uncertainty and having faith that it will work out in the end, that you don't have to know, just like a lot of people have said today, you don't have to know what's going on, and we're all kind of just figuring it out. And I think it's about learning how to put our identity not in our work, because people are going to get disappointed, and we're always going to feel this pressure to perform, to impress people, and you kind of forget about doing the work in the first place. You just start thinking about yourself, even though you come into this trying to help and serve people. And so there's this huge gap, I guess, between what's in my heart and then what's in my mind. And I think this kind of gets into what Michael was saying about habits. And it reminds me of what are the rhythms of anything that we do, and maybe in open source, the behaviors, the rituals, and the things that we do in the day-to-day, because how we spend our day-to-day is how we're going to spend our lives. And so, I can give talks about anxiety, but how am I living out how to deal with it? And so I think it's about understanding kind of the habits that we've kind of absorbed into our culture. And I think, so because we're in open source, we're absorbing the culture of technology and then also the culture of just society at large. And I think in open source, we have a huge emphasis on helping people, volunteering and serving other people, which is what drew me to open source in the first place. But I find myself, or catching myself, that I'm moving in other directions. So really easy example of this is what success means in open source. Maybe it's about how many stars you have and how many downloads you have, how many packages depend on your repo. But the metrics matter, but it's so easy to kind of get obsessed about it, and all we tweeting about how many stars and how many XYZs that we have. I think in my mind that I tell myself that it doesn't matter at all, but then I find myself wanting to say that too and caring about it. And there's a lot of buzz about that, and it's fun and easy to do that, but I want to be more deep into thinking about what that means, not just the service level of numbers. Another thing is just instant expectations. So, in our everyday lives, we have instant delivery and instant movies and instant food. So why not software, right? You can just join someone's Slack and just paste an error message that doesn't say anything, and then you have to figure out what you're supposed to do. And with Twitter, you can instantly message anyone. Stack Overflow, you're getting a question and answer. So why not with open source? We expect maintainers to somehow have all knowledge of the code base and be able to help you at any point in time. And in that sense, we kind of treat each other as robots. We became the robots. And so it becomes normal to demand for help or fixes or releases, and also to be available at basically any time in the day. Not because we're forced to, because we're a volunteer, but then you kind of feel this need to do that. And that goes into overworking. So this is a GitHub graph of my contributions from 2012 to 2017. And clearly I got really into it. And it kind of, there's a culture normally in work of just working all day or weekends. And I kind of, maybe that kind of happened to me in open source itself. I found myself doing it after work, And then now that I'm doing it full-time, maybe I feel like I have to do it on the weekend as well when no one's making me. And so I'm still trying to work through like what does it mean to actually take a break and to have rest and to care about myself as well. It's really easy to tell other people to take a break, but then I'm not even doing it. Yeah, and one of the biggest issues is this sense of entitlement in open source. I'm sure a lot of us have seen issues like this before, and it's hard to know personally if it's like we get more of this because it's getting more popular, and then popular projects are worse because then more people ask for help, or I'm just like getting more triggered and I'm just like losing my tolerance for stuff like this. And it's really easy to just kind of respond back in the same way as someone else. I feel like it's really important for me to just understand the situation that we're in, and that we should probably block issues and block people and all that, but not respond in the same way. Otherwise, it turns into like this comparison contest of like, haha, I'm not like them, or they're being mean, I'm not. And it's possible for us to become just as entitled as maintainers or anyone else, to have that self-righteousness where we think that we're better than everyone else. And so I guess the fear that I have is like, in the process of serving other people, you end up trying to serve yourself because of what's going on. And so, like how can we make room for other concepts like forgiveness, where the guy that just wrote the issue sent an email later that they felt sorry, which I guess happens. Yeah, so it reminds me of this quote. It feels kind of dark, but yeah. I think it's kind of reminds me of like a version of sacrificing yourself, dying as a hero, or self-preservation, like where I want to deal with my own issues so you turn into the person you didn't want to be in the first place. And so I don't want my concern to be right or do the right thing to like kind of overcome the desire to help the people that don't actually like or appreciate what I'm doing either. So this is what I mean by I think that open source is a mirror. Just like a lot of life, it reflects back the way that we think and how we act. And I think what we want to do is think about what are the habits that we're building that kind of help us to think more about community and other people rather than ourselves. And I think what I found is I'm developing through these habits like fear and kind of understanding that at the core that I have a lot of pride into my work and who I am. And so I think in that sense you kind of forget your place and you forget that the things that you've been given, it's a gift. And this is kind of like what Michael was saying, how it's like things are caught, not taught. And so in the same way, we kind of feel like we are in control of our lives and what we do. And the things that we do are just, what we do. But the things that we are doing, they actually change us. They affect how we act and how we feel. I think it's easy to kind of like forget that we believe not just in our minds, but in our hearts. And that is through like what we do in our behaviors. So how can we introduce behaviors that form us to shape those values that we embody versus deform us? And this is where I want to talk about the idea of virtues. They're basically, you can think of those as, we normally think of those as just good things, but I think one way of thinking about it is a way that helps us to act in the right manner, in the right character. I really like this quote from Brother Lawrence. It says, "But that at last we should gain a habit which should naturally produce its acts in us without our care and to our exceeding great delight, so that we'll want to act in a good way and that we won't really think about it and that just comes naturally." And so a definition of virtue could be a habit which brings us closer to a community's vision for the good life. So it's not really just about you improving yourself, but improving the community overall. And I think about like, why do we even use the word maintainer? We don't call ourselves dictators. We're maintainers of code, but we're also maintainers of our community. And I also like the word steward. it implies a level of responsibility that's not given from us, but someone appointed us, instead of just we kind of made this ourselves. And you might have heard that the virtues of a programmer are laziness, impatience, and hubris. This is what Larry Wall says. But he actually says also later that the virtues of community are the opposite: diligence, patience, and humility. So, like, what should we be thinking about when we think about anxiety? I think really it helps to push me and force me to call into question, like, why am I doing this in the first place? What do I actually believe rather than what's in my mind? It helps me to face the fears of what people think about who I am, this illusion of self-preservation and control. And I think the ideals that I have are tested, and I must take into account, how do I set boundaries for myself? How do I actually learn to freely receive as well as freely give? And I think that's where it's important for us to have that integrity, to know that I must practice what I actually preach. And if I really value like having boundaries and rest, then why am I not actually living it out? And so I think if our community is going to last or sustain itself, it's not going to be just through code, and it's not going to be just through money. I think this is something that we're going to have to keep ourselves accountable to. And so what does it mean to actually be free? And I think it's not just to be able to code wherever I want or be funded, but free from expectations that I give myself and other people. A freedom from like this kind of anxiousness and restlessness that we have in our hearts. And then I just like this quote, and Sunil is awesome, so yeah. If anyone would like to chat about open source, come find me after. Thanks.